When we think of Anne Frank, we almost always picture her diary, that powerful voice of a teenager living through unimaginable times, hidden away in the secret annex. But her diary stops, and her story doesn't. Today, we're going to talk about what happened next. We're going to look at the final, devastating weeks of Anne and her sister Margot.
This quote from a survivor, wow, it really just hits you, doesn't it? It sets the scene in the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. Everything that had defined their lives before, family, their arguments, their dreams, it was all gone. All that was left was this brutal, shrinking reality of a cold bunk and just trying to survive one more day.
And really, in all of that horror, the story boils down to one thing: the bond between these two sisters. As everything else was stripped away, Anne and Margot's connection to each other, well, that became their entire world. It was the last thing they had.
Their relationship went so much deeper than what you read in the diary. In the annex, sure, they were sisters. They fought sometimes, they got on each other's nerves. But in the camp, eyewitnesses said they were inseparable. They were literally clinging to each other as their strength just faded away.
And even in that complete and utter despair, they held on to these tiny little acts of being human. They would lean on each other, literally, just for warmth. They'd whisper stories about their old life in Amsterdam. They'd imagine the food they were going to eat when the war was finally over. And, incredibly, they were still planning for the future, planning to get Anne's diary published. Together, they somehow held on to hope. But of course, that fragile world they'd built, it was about to be completely destroyed. A typhus epidemic ripped through the overcrowded, filthy camp. And this disease, this was what started the final horrific chapter for the Frank sisters.
And you have to understand, typhus, it wasn't just a disease. Survivors talked about it like it was a curse. It brought these horrible fevers, delirium, but the worst part was the weakness, an extreme weakness that left people totally helpless, where even just sitting up felt like an impossible battle. It just stripped you of everything you had left.
And this right here just lays out the tragedy so starkly. The life we know from the diary, full of energy, arguments, crushes, that incredible spark, it was just gone, replaced by this hollowed-out, empty existence, where every single second was dominated by hunger and sickness. The girl who filled those pages was fading.
So, that brings us to the one moment that broke everything. For two sisters who had basically become a single unit of survival, that bond was about to be severed in the cruelest way you can imagine.
See, Margot, she'd always been the quieter one, maybe a little more frail. And by this point, she was fading so fast. Weakened by starvation, ravaged by the typhus fever, she was right there, at the absolute edge.
And then, it happened. Something so simple and so horrifying. She fell from her bunk. There was no big drama, just the quiet, awful finality of a body that was just too weak to hold on anymore.
She was just too frail. She couldn't get back up. That fall was the final thing. Margot died right there on the cold floor of the barracks.
And Anne, can you even imagine? She's watching this happen, all while battling her own fever. She was completely shattered. A witness heard her whisper these words, believing in that one moment that with Margot gone, she was totally, completely alone. And for Anne, that was it. That was the moment her own will to live just dissolved. So with Margot gone, the story shifts. It's now just about Anne. Her fight wasn't a shared struggle anymore. It was just her, alone, in a final descent into despair. And her own decline, it was so fast. She truly believed she had lost everyone. Her spirit just broke. That will to fight the disease, to fight the cold, the hunger, it was just gone. And only a few days after Margot died, Anne slipped away too. And here's the part that is just, it's so haunting. The girl whose voice would soon become famous around the entire world. She died in complete anonymity. She was just one more person among thousands, her death totally unnoticed. Her story, it seemed, was over. There was no grave, not even a marker to say where she lay. Her body and Margot's and countless others were just lost to the mass graves of Bergen-Belsen. Their only memorial was the mud and the wind of a brutal German winter.
But the story isn't over. There is one last, absolutely brutal twist to this, an agonizing detail that makes the whole thing even harder to bear.
So look at these dates. Anne and Margot die sometime in late February or early March of 1945. On April 15th, just weeks, maybe even just days later, British soldiers marched into that camp and liberated everyone who was still alive. They were so close. Just think about that for a second. If they had just a little more strength, if they could have just held on for a few more weeks, they would have been free. They might have actually seen the spring sunshine they used to whisper about in the dark. It's a what-if that's just almost impossible to think about.
So when we talk about what happened, we have to be clear. They didn't just die from typhus. The real, raw tragedy is that they were consumed by starvation, consumed by preventable disease, and ultimately, consumed by the indifference of a world that let this horror go on for way too long.
And all of this really leaves us with one big question, doesn't it? Anne's story, it gives a human face to a number of victims so huge it's impossible to comprehend. By understanding the brutal, anonymous end of this one vibrant, brilliant life, we start to really grasp the true scale of it all. And we remember why every single one of those stories matters.